The moment I opened the college savings account statement and saw a balance of $43.16 instead of the $300,000 we had saved for 18 years, was the moment I realized my wife, Michelle, had destroyed not just our children's futures, but our entire family with a secret that would lead to divorce threats from dangerous people and the complete implosion of everything we had built together. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Daniel Foster, and I'm 66 years old, standing in what used to be my home office in Naperville, Illinois, holding a piece of paper that just revealed my wife of 24 years had been living a double life that started with $20 blackjack hands and ended with our daughter losing her Yale scholarship and our son having to drop out of Northwestern, because the woman I trusted with everything had gambled away their futures one slot machine pull at a time. Let me take you back to how we got here, because this isn't just about money or addiction, but about how someone you love can become a complete stranger hiding behind a mask of normalcy, while secretly destroying everything you've worked for, and you don't see it until it's too late, and the house of cards collapses with your children's dreams buried in the rubble. Michelle and I met 26 years ago when we were both working at Abbott Laboratories in North Chicago, where I was a research scientist, and she was in accounting, which should have given her the financial sense to know better. But addiction doesn't care about your education or background when it gets its hooks into you and starts demanding to be fed. She was beautiful, smart, and ambitious, with a laugh that could light up a room and a way of making everyone feel special and important. And when she said yes to marrying me, I thought I was the luckiest man alive, not knowing I was actually signing up for a nightmare that would take 2 decades to reveal itself. We had our daughter Emma first, and she was brilliant from the start, walking at 9 months, reading by 3, and showing the kind of academic promise that made us start saving for college when she was still in diapers, because we knew she was destined for great things if we could just give her the opportunities she deserved. Our son Tyler came 3 years later, and while he wasn't the natural student Emma was, he had a gift for engineering and building things that amazed his teachers. And we knew that with the right education he could become the architect or engineer he dreamed about being when he spent hours with his Legos creating impossible structures. We were disciplined about saving, putting away $1,500 every month into 529 college savings plans, even when it meant driving older cars and skipping vacations, because we had both come from families where college wasn't an option, and we were determined our kids would have better opportunities than we did. Michelle handled our finances because she was the one with the accounting background, and I trusted her completely, never questioning when she said she was moving money between accounts for better returns, or when she took over all the online banking, because it was easier for one person to manage everything, which I now realize was the beginning of her hiding what was really happening. The first sign something was wrong came about 5 years ago when Michelle started going to conferences in Las Vegas for her job, which seemed strange because she worked for a local healthcare company that didn't have operations there. But she explained it as industry events and professional development. And I believed her, because why wouldn't I believe my wife of 19 years? She would come back from these trips exhausted and moody, which she attributed to the conference schedule and networking demands. But looking back now, I can see she was coming down from the high of gambling and dealing with the losses that were starting to mount, though I had no idea our children's college funds were being drained to feed her addiction. Then there were the sudden interest in going to Rivers Casino in Des Plaines for date nights, which she pitched as us trying something different and fun. And I went along, because I wanted to make her happy, even though I've never been much of a gambler myself, preferring to save money rather than risk it on games designed for the house to win. At first, it was just the occasional Friday night with $100 budget that we could afford to lose, but gradually Michelle started suggesting we go more often, and she would disappear to the high-limit rooms while I played penny slots or watched sports in the bar, wondering why she found this so exciting when we could be doing literally anything else. I noticed she started carrying more cash than usual, and when I asked about it, she said it was for emergencies or because she didn't trust digital payments for everything, which seemed paranoid, but not alarming enough to investigate further because this was my wife, and I trusted her even when things didn't quite add up. The credit card bills started creeping up, but Michelle always had explanations about unexpected expenses or necessary purchases for the house or kids, and she would show me spreadsheets proving we were still on track for our financial goals, not knowing she was creating fake documents, while the real accounts were being emptied to feed the slot machines and blackjack tables. She became an expert at deception, creating false statements using her accounting knowledge to make everything look normal, while behind the scenes she was taking cash advances on credit cards I didn't know existed and opening new lines of credit using our excellent credit scores that we had built over decades of responsible financial management. The gambling addiction had turned my loving wife into someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look me in the eye and lie about where she was going, who she was with, and what she was doing, while our children's futures were being bet on red or black at the roulette table, with increasingly desperate attempts to win back what she had already lost. Emma got into Yale early admission, which should have been the happiest day of our lives, but Michelle seemed stressed rather than excited. And when I suggested we review the college funds to make sure everything was ready for tuition, she said she would handle it and not to worry because everything was under control, which was the biggest lie she had ever told. Tyler was accepted to Northwestern for engineering with a partial scholarship that would still require significant funds from our savings, and Michelle assured me we had more than enough to cover both kids' education with money left over for graduate school if they wanted, which was technically true if the money had actually been there instead of in the casino's vault. The truth started to unravel when Yale sent the first tuition bill, and Michelle said she would handle the payment, but weeks went by, and we got a notice that Emma's enrollment was in jeopardy due to non-payment, which made no sense given we had supposedly saved more than enough to cover her entire education without loans or financial aid. I decided to check the accounts myself for the first time in years, and when I logged into the 529 plans, I thought there was a mistake because the balance showed $43.16 when there should have been at least $300,000 that we had saved over 18 years of sacrifice and careful planning. I called the investment company thinking it was a technical error, but they confirmed the balance was correct and provided a transaction history showing systematic withdrawals over the past 5 years, starting with small amounts of a few $1,000s and escalating to massive withdrawals of $20,000 and $30,000 at a time, all authorized by Michelle, using her access as the account owner. My hands were shaking as I printed out the statements and confronted Michelle, who initially tried to deny it, then claimed it was a temporary loan she was going to pay back, then finally broke down and admitted she had a gambling problem that had spiraled out of control, and she had lost everything trying to win back previous losses in an endless cycle of addiction. She told me it started innocently enough with small bets during a work trip to Vegas where she won $5,000 on a slot machine and felt a rush unlike anything she had ever experienced. And from that moment she was hooked, chasing that feeling even as the losses mounted and the wins became fewer and further between. The conferences she had been attending were actually solo trips to Vegas where she would gamble for days straight, barely sleeping or eating, just feeding money into machines that promised jackpots, but delivered nothing but empty bank accounts and broken promises to herself that this would be the last time before she won it all back. When Vegas became too expensive and time-consuming, she started going to the local casinos, sometimes calling in sick to work, so she could spend all day at Rivers or driving to Indiana where the casinos were bigger, and she could lose herself in the noise and lights, and false hope that the next hand would be the one that changed everything. She had maxed out 3 credit cards. I didn't know about owing $47,000 at 24% interest, and had taken out a home equity line of credit for $75,000 that was also gone, explaining why she had been so insistent that I not refinance our mortgage when rates dropped, because it would have revealed the HELOC I didn't know existed. But the worst part was still to come, because Michelle hadn't just gambled with our money, but had borrowed from people she shouldn't have borrowed from when the banks and credit cards cut her off, and she owed $30,000 to a loan shark named Vincent, who was now calling our house and making threats about what would happen if he didn't get his money by the end of the month. She had given him our real address and information, thinking she would win the money back before he ever needed to collect. But now he was sending men to sit outside our house in black SUVs, and our 17-year-old Emma was scared to leave for school because strange men were taking pictures of her and following her to make sure we knew they were serious. I called the police, but they said unless an actual crime was committed, there was nothing they could do about people sitting in cars on a public street, and Vincent was too smart to make explicit threats that could be prosecuted, just implied consequences that made it clear our family was in danger if we didn't pay. Michelle's wealthy parents, Richard and Patricia, lived in a mansion in Lake Forest and had millions in the bank, but when I swallowed my pride and went to them for help, they refused, saying Michelle needed to face the consequences of her actions, and they wouldn't enable her addiction by bailing her out, even if it meant their grandchildren suffered, which seemed cruel, but they had apparently been through this before. It turns out Michelle had a gambling problem in her 20s that they had bailout her out of to the tune of $100,000, with the promise that she would get help and never gamble again. But addiction doesn't work that way, and she had just gotten better at hiding it until now, when the stakes were too high and the losses too big to conceal. Richard actually laughed when I told him about the college funds, saying he had warned me not to let Michelle handle the finances when we got married. But I had dismissed his concerns as a father being overprotective, not realizing he was trying to warn me about a demon that had been dormant but never truly gone, just waiting for the right trigger to awaken. Patricia cried and said she was sorry for Emma and Tyler, but that giving Michelle money would just restart the cycle, and next time it would be worse, maybe even fatal, because gamblers always escalate until they lose everything, including their lives, either to suicide or to the people they owe money to when they can't pay. Emma had to decline her Yale acceptance because we couldn't afford the tuition, and she was devastated, especially when she found out why her college fund was gone. And she looked at her mother with such betrayal and hurt that it broke my heart, because this was supposed to be her time to shine, and instead she was applying to community college while her classmates went to Ivy League schools. Tyler had to drop out of Northwestern after 1 semester because we couldn't make the second payment, and he came home angry and bitter, refusing to speak to Michelle and spending all his time in his room designing buildings he might never get to actually build, because his education had been stolen by his mother's addiction and our inability to protect the money meant for his future. I filed for divorce immediately, but Michelle begged me to reconsider, saying she would get help, go to Gamblers Anonymous, do Whatever it took to make things right, but how do you make right the theft of your children's dreams and the destruction of decades of careful planning and sacrifice for the temporary high of pulling a slot machine lever? The divorce proceedings were complicated by the debt because Illinois is a marital property state, meaning I was potentially responsible for half of the gambling debts, even though I didn't know about them, which seemed insanely unfair. But the law doesn't care about fairness, only about legal obligations and contracts, even if one party was defrauded by the other. My lawyer managed to argue that the gambling debts were not for family purposes and therefore shouldn't be considered marital debt. But Vincent and his associates didn't care about legal distinctions. They just wanted their money and made it clear that both Michelle and I were responsible in their eyes regardless of what any divorce decree said. I had to liquidate my 401k, taking massive tax penalties, to come up with the $30,000 to pay off Vincent just to ensure our family's safety, and watching 20 years of retirement savings disappear to pay for my wife's gambling debts felt like being robbed twice, first by Michelle, and then by the criminals she had gotten involved with. The credit card companies were more willing to negotiate, and we settled the $47,000 in debt for $22,000, which I paid by selling everything valuable we owned, including my classic car I had restored with Tyler, and Michelle's jewelry, including her engagement ring, which she cried about, but had no right to keep given what she had done. The house had to be sold to pay off the HELOC, and we made just enough to clear the debt and have about $30,000 left, which I put in a new account that Michelle had no access to, and used to rent a small apartment for me and the kids, while Michelle moved in with her sister, who was the only family member willing to take her in. The impact on our children went beyond just the financial devastation, with Emma developing anxiety and depression that required therapy she couldn't really afford, and Tyler channeling his anger into working construction jobs that were beneath his intelligence, but were all he could get without a degree, while saving money to eventually go back to school. Emma managed to get into University of Illinois Chicago with financial aid and student loans that will burden her for decades, and she works 30 hours a week while going to school full-time, which is affecting her grades, but she has no choice because the money that should have been there for her education is gone forever. Tyler is taking community college classes at night while working during the day, slowly working toward his engineering degree. But at this rate, it will take him 7 years to finish what should have been a 4-year program, and he's bitter about watching his high school classmates graduate and start careers while he's still grinding away. Michelle entered a treatment program for gambling addiction and claims she's been clean for 6 months, but trust once broken can never be fully restored, and I don't believe anything she says anymore because she proved she could lie to my face for years while destroying our family's future one bet at a time. She's working as a bookkeeper now, which seems dangerous for someone with a gambling addiction to be handling money. But she needs to work to pay her share of the debts, and apparently her employer doesn't know about her history because she didn't disclose it, and I haven't told them, though maybe I should. The financial recovery will take years, if not decades, with me working past retirement age to try to rebuild some savings, while also helping the kids with their education expenses as much as I can, though it's a fraction of what we had planned and promised them when they were young and had such bright futures ahead. I've had to have hard conversations with both kids about how their lives will be different now, how they'll have to work harder, take on debt, and make sacrifices their peers won't have to make, all because their mother couldn't stop pulling slot machine levers, even when she knew she was stealing from them with every pull. Emma asked me recently why I didn't see the signs earlier, why I trusted Michelle with everything, and I had to admit that I was blinded by love and trust, and the assumption that the person you marry and have children with would never betray you in such a fundamental way. But addiction makes people do things they would never do otherwise. Tyler is angrier and says he will never forgive his mother for stealing his future, and he's cut her off, completely refusing to see her or take her calls, even when she writes letters begging for forgiveness and promising to make it right somehow, though we all know she can never give back what she took from them. The extended family has taken sides, with some supporting Michelle, saying addiction is a disease and she needs support, not abandonment, while others, including her own parents, say she made choices and must face the consequences, even if it means losing her family, which she effectively has, since neither child wants anything to do with her. I've joined a support group for families affected by gambling addiction, and the stories are heartbreakingly similar, with retirement funds, drained children's educations, destroyed homes lost, and families torn apart by the lies and deception that always accompany this particular demon that turns loving family members into strangers who will steal from anyone to feed their habit. The group leader told me that gambling addiction has the highest suicide rate of any addiction, and I worry about Michelle, even though I'm angry because she's still the mother of my children and was once the woman I loved before the addiction took her away and replaced her with someone I don't recognize, who could look at her children and steal their futures. Some days I blame myself for not seeing the signs, for trusting too much, for not insisting on transparency with our finances. But the counselor reminds me that addicts are master manipulators, and Michelle used her accounting knowledge to create a false reality that would have fooled anyone who trusted their spouse the way marriage requires you to trust. The casino industry makes billions off people like Michelle, promoting the lie that you can win big if you just keep playing, when the reality is the house always wins. And the only jackpot is the misery and destruction left in the wake of addiction that takes everything and gives nothing back except empty promises and broken dreams. I drive past Rivers Casino sometimes on my way to work and feel such rage at the billboard advertising jackpots and winners, when I know inside there are people like Michelle losing their children's college funds, their retirement savings, their homes, their families, all for the momentary thrill of maybe winning, but mostly losing everything that matters. The kids and I are rebuilding slowly, with Emma on track to graduate with her bachelor's degree in 3 more years, and Tyler making progress toward his engineering degree. But they're both carrying scars that will never fully heal, and a wariness about trusting people that breaks my heart, because they shouldn't have to live with that burden. Michelle sends money when she can, usually a few $100s a month, that she says is for the kids' education, but it's such a pitiful amount compared to what she stole that it feels more like an insult than help, though I put it in their accounts, because every little bit helps when you're starting from less than zero. Her parents finally softened enough to create small education trusts for Emma and Tyler, with the stipulation that Michelle can never access them, which helps, but it's maybe $20,000 each, when they should have had hundreds of thousands, if their mother hadn't gambled it all away, chasing the dragon of addiction that can never be caught. I'm 66 years old now, and instead of planning retirement, I'm working overtime and taking consulting gigs on the side to try to help my kids and rebuild something for my own future, though I'll probably work until I drop, because there's no safety net anymore, just the reality of starting over when most people my age are winding down. The house we raised our children in was sold to a young family who has no idea of the drama and heartbreak that happened there, and I hope they have better luck than we did, and that they're smart enough to maintain transparency about money, because secrets, especially financial ones, can destroy everything you've built. Sometimes Emma calls crying from stress and exhaustion working and studying, and trying to make ends meet, and I hold her and apologize for failing to protect her future. And she says it's not my fault, but we both know that if I had paid attention, if I had been involved in our finances, this might not have happened, or at least would have been caught sooner. Tyler has channeled his anger into determination and says he will never let anyone control his finances the way Mom controlled ours, and he's already investing what little he can save with a discipline that would make me proud if it wasn't born from such betrayal and loss that no young person should have to experience. The Gambling Addiction Support Group has become a lifeline where I can talk to people who understand the unique betrayal of having someone you love steal from your children to feed their addiction, and the complicated grief of mourning someone who is still alive, but no longer the person you married. One man in the group lost his house and business to his wife's gambling addiction and ended up living in his car for 6 months before rebuilding, and he tells me it gets better, but the trust never comes back, and you spend the rest of your life looking for signs you missed the first time, even with new people who have done nothing wrong. Another woman's husband gambled away their retirement and their children's inheritance from her parents, and she stayed with him through recovery, but says she checks their bank accounts every day and will never again allow him access to more than a few $100s at a time, which seems like no way to live, but is better than losing everything again. The statistics are sobering, with only about 8% of gambling addicts successfully recovering long-term, and most relapsing multiple times before either getting clean or losing everything, including their lives. And I wonder which category Michelle will fall into, and whether she'll ever truly understand the magnitude of what she's done to our family. The casino sent Michelle promotional materials to our old address, offering free rooms and meal credits to get her to come back, and I wanted to drive there and scream at them for preying on addicts. But I know they don't care about destroyed families, they care about profits, and people like Michelle are their best customers, because they always come back until they have nothing left to give. I've become an advocate for stricter gambling regulations and have testified at state hearings about the need for better protections against predatory lending and the casino industry's targeting of vulnerable people. But it feels like shouting into the void when the industry has so much money and political influence that nothing ever changes. Emma wrote an essay for one of her classes about growing up thinking you were middle class only to discover your mother had gambled away your future. And the professor said it was one of the most powerful pieces of writing he had ever read, which made me both proud and heartbroken that she had such pain to draw from at such a young age. Tyler refuses to talk about it except in therapy, where his counselor says he's processing the betrayal and loss in his own way. But it will take years to fully work through the trauma of having your mother steal your future and your father fail to protect you from someone who was supposed to love you most. The financial crimes Michelle committed within our family were never prosecuted because I didn't want to send my children's mother to prison. But sometimes I wonder if consequences might have helped her understand the severity of what she did, instead of allowing her to frame it as a disease that wasn't really her fault when every bet was a choice. Our story has become a cautionary tale in our community, with friends and acquaintances quietly checking their own finances and having conversations about transparency and shared responsibility that they should have had years ago, but didn't because they trusted like I trusted, until that trust was betrayed in the worst possible way. Michelle's sister told me she still struggles with urges to gamble and has to avoid driving past casinos or even gas stations with lottery tickets, because the addiction is always there waiting for a moment of weakness to take control again and destroy whatever small progress she's made toward rebuilding her life. The University Financial Aid Office has been understanding and helpful with Emma's situation, but she still carries massive debt that will affect her choices for decades, limiting where she can live, what jobs she can take, and when she can start a family, because student loans don't care that your college fund was gambled away, they just want their money. Tyler has become incredibly disciplined and frugal, living on almost nothing while saving every penny for school and his future. But it's aged him beyond his years and stolen the carefree youth he should have had if his mother hadn't chosen gambling over her children's futures and her family's security. I've had to explain to both kids that their mother's addiction doesn't mean she didn't love them, but that addiction rewires the brain, making the need to gamble stronger than any other impulse, including protecting your children, which is almost impossible for them to understand, because how can anything be stronger than a mother's love for her children? The divorce was finalized a year ago, with Michelle getting nothing except debt and the burden of knowing she destroyed her family, while I got the kids and the responsibility of trying to help them rebuild their lives from the ashes of their mother's addiction that burned through everything we had built together over 24 years. Some nights I lie awake thinking about the life we should have had with Emma at Yale and Tyler at Northwestern, both thriving and preparing for bright futures, while Michelle and I enjoyed our empty nest years and planned for retirement. But that life was gambled away $5 at a time, until there was nothing left but debt and broken dreams. The worst part is that Michelle is still out there somewhere, possibly gambling again, possibly in recovery, possibly dead for all I know, because I've cut off all contact to protect myself and the kids from further damage. But you can't just turn off caring about someone you spent half your life with, even when they betrayed you in the worst way possible. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.